All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Father Frank Pavone. He's one of the most prominent pro-life leaders in the world. Originally from New York, he was ordained in 1988 by Cardinal John O'Connor and has dedicated his entire life and ministry to ending abortion. In 1993, he requested and received permission to serve as a National Director of Priests for Life, the largest pro-life ministry in the Catholic Church. He is also the president of the National Pro-Life Religious Council and the National Pastoral Director of the Silent No More Awareness Campaign and of Rachel's Vineyard, the world's largest ministry of healing after abortion. Father Pavone travels throughout the country to an average of 4 states every week, preaching and teaching against abortion. He broadcasts daily to hundreds of thousands of people on television and online programs. And I've been watching Father Frank Pavone for over 25 years, and I'm just thrilled that he's here with us tonight. So let's give a warm welcome to Father Frank Pavone.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It is a great joy to be back in Indiana, and what a marvelous job you have done tonight in setting the stage for this next chapter in the pro-life movement. Again, to the whole Kavanaugh family, what a wonderful job. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you to the elected officials that we have recognized here tonight who understand that if a politician can't respect the life of a little baby, how are we supposed to expect them to respect ours? We can't. We need public servants who know the difference between serving the public and killing the public. And if they don't know that difference, they don't belong in public office. The candidates and the elected officials we have here tonight do belong in public office, and we need more of them. So God bless you. And the clergy, the pastors, some of my brother priests are here. We need the clergy speaking up so loud, so clear. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, to whom I want to refer a little bit, and you saw his picture there among those who have come over from the other side. He founded the abortion industry in America and then became solidly pro-life after that. He said that he and his colleagues, and here I'm quoting him directly, would never have gotten away with what they did if the clergy had been united, purposeful, and strong in standing up against it. We need to become more united, purposeful, and strong. We are. That is happening, and praise God for the faithful clergy from all denominations who are here tonight. Thank you for your service. And so, brothers and sisters, we do stand here, the first of our annual banquets, when we can say Roe v. Wade is gone, it is no more. But you know what? I don't want you to be too surprised that Roe versus Wade has been overruled. The reason I say that is it was not some kind of mighty fortress. It was more like a dilapidated building, over these decades becoming more and more weak on a fake foundation, with parts of the building that had been removed, the building mostly unoccupied, and literally falling apart. Now, why do I say that? First of all, you know, the case itself began in confusion. The justices of the Supreme Court at the time that this case was first brought before the court weren't quite sure what it was about. Many of them did not think they were arguing about whether there's a right to abortion. They thought it was a matter of whether the federal courts could intervene in state criminal proceedings. They thought that it was a jurisdictional case. And then they gradually found out that it was about, quote, abortion rights, except the case had no record. Usually when a case goes up to the Supreme Court, it's got a pretty hefty record. All right, there's documentation, there's names of people and testimonies and affidavits, and maybe there's a trial. And Roe v. Wade, brothers and sisters, had none of that. It had a signature of a certain Roe, whom I not only knew personally as a friend, but I was a spiritual mentor to her, and I received her into the Catholic Church because the Roe of Roe versus Wade rejected Roe versus Wade. Norma McCorvey from Dallas, Texas. And Norma, well, even at the time that she took on the case, she didn't know what was going on. And she herself was ambivalent about abortion. She wasn't even 100% for it. And here was the Roe of Roe v. Wade. So all they needed from her was her signature. She didn't appear in court. She didn't testify. She didn't undergo any of that. She didn't know what was going on. There was no record in this case. In other words, in fact, if you read and listen to the oral arguments, which you can still do today, they're up on the Supreme Court website, you'll hear the justices saying, are there any facts in this case? Are these even real people? These are the actual questions being asked when the cases are being argued. The case, furthermore, did not have any appellate review. Those of you who are familiar with the court system and constitutional law, there was no appellate review. It went right from the district court all the way up to the Supreme Court, skipped the circuit courts altogether. This was a very weak case. At the core of Roe and of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which later reaffirmed Roe, as you see in the Dobbs decision, this whole question of viability was front and center. In other words, up until Dobbs, this past June 24th, the dogma of the courts was, well, you can't prohibit abortion, you can't protect the unborn until viability. Well, where did this viability line come from? It's nowhere in the Constitution. You know where else it isn't? It wasn't in the laws from Texas or Georgia that were the subject of Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. It wasn't in any of the briefs, and it wasn't in any of the oral arguments brought before the Supreme Court in that case. It was a concept inserted in a memo circulated among the justices 1 month before Roe v. Wade came out. Viability. How could it possibly be such a weighty and central concept when it wasn't even there until the last few weeks before the decision? You see how shoddy the whole thing was? Not to mention, of course, the fundamental flaw of Roe v. Wade, that the asserted right to abortion simply was never there. If you look, and I want to urge you to read the Dobbs decision if you haven't done so already, and we have a special website, SupremeCourtVictory.com, where you can not only read it, you can see videos that I have done interviewing various attorneys, various authors of many of the briefs that were submitted to the court in this Dobbs case. We submitted one ourselves from Priests for Life. You can really get a good education about this case at SupremeCourtVictory.com. And one of the things you will see, that is, if you boil down all the exquisite, articulate, learned arguments, and they really constitute a masterpiece of jurisprudence, the argument in the Dobbs case in regard to a constitutional right to abortion all boils down to 3 words. It's not there. It's not in the Constitution. It never was. It's not in any, up until Roe v. Wade now, it was never in any state or federal law, state or federal court decision, scholarly treatise, or anything. You know, when jurists look for a constitutional right, if they don't see it in the text of the Constitution, they look at the history and traditions of American life in the legal system, and they find it there, but it wasn't there either. Nowhere did anyone in American life assert a right to abortion until the Roe v. Wade case came at the beginning of the 1970s. It was nowhere to be found. And that's one of the reasons why we really shouldn't be surprised that this case was overruled. Because it was on such a shaky, fake foundation right from day one. Now, there are other indications that have happened over the years, not the least of which the conversion of the Jane Roe herself, as I already mentioned, that led us to the conviction that, yes, we would see the end of this. And one of them was the Casey decision itself. The Dobbs case overturned both Roe and Casey. Casey was a case in 1992 that we thought at that time was going to reverse Roe v. Wade. It didn't, but it hardly upheld it either. I mean, technically it upheld it, but only technically. Because if you look at what the Casey decision did, it largely dismantled Roe. It took away the whole legislative framework that Roe wrote, and it shouldn't have because it's not a legislature. It's a court, except that it legislated, and it created this trimester framework, what the states could and couldn't do in the first and the second and the third trimester. Casey threw that all out the window. They said, this doesn't work. But then Casey went ahead and created a new framework that was similarly untethered from the Constitution. And so that's why Dobbs got rid of that too. But the point is, they didn't like Roe. They reaffirmed Roe for only one reason. It's been around a long time. I guess we got to keep it. That was literally the argument of the court. They did not endorse the reasoning of Roe v. Wade because the reasoning was so weak. The medical reasoning was so weak, they literally skipped over hundreds of years of medical research. You read the medical reasoning in Roe v. Wade, it's a joke. And they talk about medieval times and the ideas of people back then who didn't have the slightest idea about how human reproduction occurs with the science that we know today. And the history is even worse. They relied on one person for history who had novel historical ideas about why the United States had laws against abortion. They were brand new ideas that had never been heard before and have been discarded and delegitimized since. So what is Roe v. Wade? Literally, it's an embarrassment. And even jurists and even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was on the court, criticized not the conclusion that it came to of legal abortion, but the reasoning by which it got there. Even she and many others who were actually pro-abortion criticized this utter embarrassment of an excuse for constitutional reasoning. So, brothers and sisters, no, don't be surprised. We have gotten to a point now, 49 years later, and you know, I have been saying for decades, we are well within the historical time frame for a serious error like this to be fixed. Think of Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court in Dobbs referred to that case a number of times as a key example of why sometimes it's necessary for the court to make a big change, to correct a big decision from its past, even that's been around a long time. Because Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 said separate but equal is okay. So discrimination was legal, was constitutional. It took 58 years for the Supreme Court to come to its senses and reverse that decision with the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. It took 58 years. This only took us 49. We've got to take an historical perspective here, and that's why we have urged over these decades patience and lots of patience within the pro-life movement. And we've exercised that patience, haven't we? We have marched, we have prayed. Many of you have been in this movement during all these decades. We have sacrificed, we have witnessed, we have educated, we have preached, we have broadcasted, we have published, we have been the people of life, and God has honored the prayers and the sacrifices of his people in giving us this victory. And we have voted. Brothers and sisters, when you look at how this came about, the justices that overturned Roe, these are courageous men and women. Justice Clarence Thomas, I know him and his wife personally, and this is a humble man. Those of you that have met him know exactly what I'm talking about. He's a very humble man. He's got a great sense of humor, too. And there's a documentary out about him that you should look up. It's called Created Equal. And he says in that documentary, he's talking about his own life. And he says, you know, my confirmation hearings, that was rough, right? Okay, so it was George H.W. Bush, George Bush 41, who nominated him to the court, and then you remember the whole fiasco of his confirmation trial. He got through it, but the Judiciary Committee was headed by a certain Senator Joe Biden. Brandon. And Justice Thomas, in his documentary, says this: the Judiciary Committee during my confirmation hearing was interested above all in one question. You know what the question was? How would I rule on Roe versus Wade? That was uppermost in their minds. You know what also was uppermost in the minds of the voters, or a lot of them anyway, in electing and re-electing George W. Bush, was the Supreme Court. Many of us were involved in that election. I was involved very heavily in that, especially his re-election, because we knew it was very likely that he was going to be able to nominate justices to the bench, and he's the one who gave us Justice Samuel Alito, who ended up writing the Dobbs opinion. My point is, so many of the voters had the Supreme Court in mind as their motivating factor. And you know when that happened again? 2016. The election of the president in 2016, CNN did an exit poll and found that some 20% of the voters, now that's a solid portion of the electorate, said the most important thing in their mind in voting for president was how it would shape the Supreme Court. And of that 20% of the electorate, 56% of them voted for a man by the name of Donald J. Trump. And in October of 2016, then candidate Trump was asked the question. By the way, I was privileged to serve both in 2016 and 2020 on two of his committees, for Catholic issues and for pro-life issues. And it was a privilege to do so. And we knew in 2016, if this man was elected, that he would do not only everything that past pro-life presidents had done, but he would do more. And he did, more than any other. But when he was asked in October of 2016, Mr. Trump, do you want to see Roe v. Wade reversed? You remember what his answer was? Here was his answer. I'm going to quote him verbatim. If I get the opportunity to appoint 2 or maybe 3 justices to the Supreme Court, the overturn of Roe v. Wade will happen automatically. And boy, was he right. We would not have this victory were it not for President Donald J. Trump. In this Dobbs case, more sitting members of Congress, and we're privileged to have Congressman Bouchon with us here tonight, more sitting members of Congress than ever in history called for the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Because they were saying to the court, let us do our job to legislate, representing the will of the people. We don't want a policy imposed on us by unelected judges, especially when it's so disconnected from the Constitution. Let us do our jobs. And not only did those members of Congress write a brief, they wrote several briefs actually to the Supreme Court in this case, but 398 state legislators from 41 different states wrote a brief as well, and they said, let us do our jobs, legislating on the state level. The United States, in fact, the government of the United States, was a friend of the court no less than 6 times in the decade before Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and in Casey itself, asking the court to reverse Roe. So this has been a groundswell. You know, there has been no Supreme Court decision more widely and deeply criticized by federal judges in their cases, even when they were applying Roe v. Wade. You know, when the Supreme Court decides an issue, you've got what's called vertical precedent. The lower courts on that same issue have to follow the judgment of the Supreme Court. But even the judges who, because it was their duty, applied Roe over all these decades, many of them criticized it very harshly. No decision has been more harshly criticized than Roe v. Wade. The point being, yeah, we saw this coming. It should elate us that now it's been reversed, but it shouldn't totally surprise us. Now, brothers and sisters, what we're facing now, it's been summarized well for you here tonight, and let me look at it from the angle of the state of Indiana. First of all, congratulations. I know there are some state legislators here tonight, and I met some of you coming in. Thank you for being the first state legislature to exercise your newfound authority over the issue of abortion after Dobbs, the first to do so in the nation, making law on abortion. And I know very, very well, as you know even better, this law went into effect for a week until a judge blocked it. Now, listen. Have confidence. First of all, understand the strategy of the other side. They are furious because for 50 years now, they have not had to make the case to the American people as to why abortion is good. They have not had to make that case. And it's a good thing because you know what? They don't have a case. Abortion is indefensible. There is no argument in favor of or justifying the killing of a baby. It's just not there. But they haven't had to make a case because they, like little kids, were hiding behind the robes of the justices. It's a constitutional right. It's a constitutional right. They were handed it on a silver platter in Roe v. Wade without having had to persuade the American people. The pro-abortion movement has never succeeded in persuading the American people that abortion should be allowed throughout pregnancy like Roe v. Wade said it could be. They have never persuaded. There's never been a survey anywhere that has shown a majority of the American people wanting abortion without limits. And yet that's what Roe gave us in practical terms. And the pro-abortion movement ever since that day, January 22nd, 1973, have been hiding behind the justices. Oh, it's a constitutional right. And they think that that's the only thing that they needed to say. Well, if you look at what happened in courtroom after courtroom, including in the district court in Mississippi, when Mississippi, that's how the Dobbs case started, when they passed a law a few years ago saying we're going to protect babies starting at 15 weeks, that's obviously before viability, right? So in the light of Roe, that was unconstitutional. You can't protect the babies that early in the pregnancy. But they had good reason to protect them because they were invoking the science. As Michael would say, by the way, Michael, great to be with you. Thank for the work, the leadership you give in Indiana, have done for so many years. It's great to be with you again. And Michael mentioned, this is about science. And so the legislators of Mississippi, looking at the science, said, hey, look, we know, not only are these babies can feel pain. And they presented all kinds of other evidence, too. They presented, furthermore, evidence about the harm abortion does to women. Now, you saw in some of those slides one of the campaigns that we do at Priests for Life. And by the way, you'll see information about this on the literature table. Some of you have stopped there already, but please take a moment, take some of the books and brochures that I have there. Some of that information is about Silent No More. This is a worldwide, interdenominational movement where we let the women, not just the moms, but the dads too, and the grandparents, anyone who's lost children in their family to abortion, speak out about the pain and also speak out about the forgiveness and healing that they find in Jesus Christ. This is a powerful campaign, silentnomore.com. Check it out. The legislators of Mississippi were bringing this evidence to their colleagues, and on the basis of all of this, they passed this law. Now, here's the point. When the law was challenged in court, understand what happened, because this is going to unlock for you a secret about what's going on now and where we go from here and how we fix the problem here in Indiana. The district court said, we don't want to hear anything about all that evidence. Look at what happened. They put their hands over their ears. They put their hands over their eyes. They said, we don't want to hear it. Well, why not? because this law prohibits abortion before viability. The court said that is the only relevant question. Does it prohibit abortion before viability? Well, yes, nobody denies that. That's it. Case closed. Law is blocked. Well, wait a minute. It doesn't make any sense. We know more about the child now, the unborn child. We've learned more about this child since Roe v. Wade than we've learned from the beginning of human history. Sorry, doesn't matter. And that's why the Supreme Court said it's time to examine whether the fact that an abortion ban is pre-viability is automatically unconstitutional. It's time to raise and address that question. That was the Dobbs case. Brothers and sisters, they hid behind the fictional constitutional right to abortion. Now that that is gone, they're naked. They have to make their case to the public based on the merits of abortion, and that terrifies them because they have no case. Now we, in the pro-life effort, we've been making the case for protecting these babies on its merits from day one. From day one. We didn't have to hide behind any justices. We don't have to hide behind the court. We don't have to hide behind the Constitution. We know who this baby is, and we know that abortion is wrong. And you know what? We can make the case based on science, based on psychology, based on sociology, based on history, based on constitutional law. We can make the case based on any field of human knowledge that you want to name. And we've done it, and we continue to do it, and we get better and better at it. The other side, now they're on a new playing field. Oh, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to convince the people that abortion is okay? See, what the justices said in Dobbs is, hey, listen, who are we, 9 justices of the court, to decide this complex issue for the American people? You know what? You, the people, are wise enough to figure it out. You have a legislative process, debates, amendment, testimonies, hearings, amendments. Go to work and work it out. We have confidence in you, the people. And you and your elected representatives can work this out. The fact now that in a courtroom, in a legislature, or at the kitchen table when citizens are talking with one another, or in the workplace around the water cooler, people, and this is true in Indiana, it's true in Mississippi. You know, last weekend I spoke to a group of pro-lifers in New York State, and tomorrow I'll be speaking to a group in California, 2 of the worst pro-abortion states. It is just as true in those places that now we can say nobody, no legislator, no judge, no citizen can stand up and say there's a federal constitutional right to abortion. They can't say it anymore. Now the fact, now understand how this changes things. The fact that they can't say that anymore means that a court cannot anymore just strike down a pro-life law. Because that's exactly why they were striking them down. Oh, it's constitutional right to abortion. Nor does discussion now get so easily cut off, because even just citizen to citizen, people are discussing abortion, debating abortion. How many times has it happened to you? You're making some really good arguments, and then just someone pipes up and says, oh, but it's a constitutional right. And it tends to shut down argument. Who wants to argue against the constitutional right? They can't do it anymore. Now, what Dobbs did, even though, of course, this is federal jurisdiction, it even changes things in the state courts and the state constitutions, because this is where the abortionists now want to run and hide. They can no longer hide behind the robes of the Supreme Court justices, so you know what they want to do? They want to hide behind the state court justices and the state constitutions. They want to hurry, and I'm glad you mentioned about the Michigan initiatives. Very, very important that we support our friends in Michigan about this, and there's one in California too. They want to put this stuff in the Constitution, and we're going to see it in many other places too. There's one going on in Vermont also. We're going to see it more and more. But notice it's an act of cowardice. Because what the other side, again, is trying to do is bypass the legislative process. Think about it. If you put something in the Constitution, or if you get a court to declare that it's in the Constitution, then no legislature can legislate against it. Because any law has to conform to the Constitution. So if the citizens of Michigan, for example, allow this ballot initiative to go through, what they don't realize is they're depriving themselves, their children, and their children's children, and their elected representatives that they work hard to elect from passing any kind of policy on abortion or protecting these babies. Plus, the good pro-life laws they've put in place already will be struck down. But it's an act of cowardice because the other side has no arguments, and therefore they don't want to be forced to make the arguments in the court of public opinion, in political campaigns, or in the legislature. Now, Dobbs helps us here. Even though federal jurisdiction, state jurisdiction are distinct, nevertheless, the arguments of the Supreme Court influence state courts and judges and constitutional arguments. And I need you to understand, friends, take those arguments to your mind and heart and your lips. Read the Dobbs decision. Because you're going to find there the arguments you need to make here in Indiana when judges and when people try to say, oh, but we're going to find this right in our state constitution. Nonsense. It's no more in the Constitution of Indiana than it is in the Constitution of the United States. And you rely on the history that Dobbs pointed to. Never in our history has any scholarly treatise, state law, state court, state constitution asserted a right to abortion. Never. Well, that's true everywhere. That's true on the federal level. It's true on the state level. Everywhere it's true. It's true in California. It's true in New York. So for them to try to put it in the Constitution or suddenly discover it in the Constitution, we have to, first of all, make the argument from history. Where are you getting this from? Because one of the things the justices did in Dobbs, it was actually an act, you can look at it spiritually as an act of repentance. These justices repented on the name of the court for making such an egregious and damaging error, and they repented for substituting their own judgment for the judgment of the American people. Because a big part of the Dobbs decision, as you'll see when you read it or if you have read it, is a litany of all the different state laws that were in effect for 100 years before Roe v. Wade, prohibiting abortion and protecting the babies. And the justices said, well, wait a minute, if the American people have been so consistent in their judgment that these children should be protected, who are we to substitute our policy preferences for theirs? This is a defense not just of the unborn. Dobbs is a defense of self-governance. It's a defense of liberty. It's a defense of we, the people, governing ourselves and not being governed by tyrants or unelected judges who are going to impose policy on us against our beliefs. This is a defense of America. This is a victory for freedom. So you appeal to the history. Secondly, you use the reasoning that they used about privacy. Privacy? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with abortion. Of course not. The court acknowledged in Dobbs that there are widely supported rights of privacy that we all have. And the courts have ruled on those rights. You can marry who you want to marry, or you can choose not to marry at all. You can choose how you're going to educate your children. And there were many decisions that they quote that deal with things like, well, you know, you can teach your children German if you want. I mean, literally, there are cases about this. And the justices pointed out this one important thing, which is necessary to point out here in Indiana as this debate rages now about the law that is now stuck in the courts. Where in the world, and since when, does the legitimately acknowledged right to privacy include ending another life? Friends, even Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey and other decisions that the Supreme Court has issued on abortion makes the following assertion. even those cases, make the following assertion: abortion is unique. It is a different kind of act from any of the other acts that fall under the rubric of privacy or liberty. It's different because only abortion involves the purposeful termination of another life. And that we have got to argue on the state level just as forcefully as it has been argued by the majority in Dobbs at the federal level. There is no right to kill in the right to privacy. There is no right to kill in the right to liberty. Now, I also know, and it's been mentioned here tonight already, one of the challenges against your law was by the Church of Satan. And they want to invoke autonomy. Now, we know that the devil is real, okay? Scripture says he goes around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. He's a real spiritual being and a dangerous one. But when you see people holding signs at these pro-abortion rallies that say, "Hail Satan," it's not primarily about worshiping the spiritual creature who is the devil, as real as he is. You know what it's really about for these people? It's worship of self. It's I can do what I want. That's what Satanism really is about. They don't care so much about the devil. They care about themselves. I will assert my own will. I will do what I want. Of course, Jesus Christ gives us exactly the opposite example. Though he was in the form of God, Paul says to the Philippians, Jesus did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself. He became obedient even to death. Okay, so we see the spiritual contrast here. The assertion of self on the part of this satanic church, all of a sudden trying to put abortion under the rubric of religious liberty, well, guess what? They're going to run into a big roadblock because the courts of the United States, including the Supreme Court, have already addressed this. There were cases coming out of the South dealing with snake handling. I don't know if you've ever heard of these cases, but snake handling in church is based on the words of Jesus that you will be able to handle poisonous snakes without harm. Well, some people were getting harmed, and so the constitutional question was presented to the courts: can the state prohibit snake handling even though it's a core religious belief of some of these churches? And the answer of the courts was yes. Because the government has a compelling interest in protecting the lives of the people. So yes, while respecting someone's right to believe what they want, we can limit their behavior if their behavior is hurting other people. And the court even gave the example of what if part of a religious ritual was child sacrifice. So if I have a baby on the altar and I'm about to slay the child because I believe that's pleasing to God, can the state prohibit me from doing that even though it's my religious belief? And the answer is absolutely yes. And the Dobbs case talks about this. The Dobbs case says you can believe what you want, but there's got to be limits to how you can act on those beliefs, and you can't end up taking another life. Sorry, Satanists. You're going to run into a big constitutional roadblock with this silly thing that you are saying in Indiana and all the rest of the country as well. It's not going to work, friends. It's not going to work. Push the argument. We've got a solid basis now with the Dobbs case. It's already influencing state judges who are saying previous decisions that they made striking down pro-life laws. This judge here in Indiana, it hasn't dawned on him yet, but it will. They said, gee, we can't rely on those decisions anymore. You know why? Because those decisions relied on Roe v. Wade, and it's gone. We don't even realize yet. Friends, we're at the very beginning of this. We don't even realize yet all the great implications that Roe is gone. The whole foundation has been taken out from under the legislative and jurisprudential activity of the pro-abortion movement for the last half century. It's gone. Which means that every law and every court decision that relied on Roe and Casey, even on the state level, is now ready to go as well. We just need to push it with the right arguments. We can't let the other side get away with repeating the mistake they made in Roe. That's what they're trying to do in Indiana. That's what they're trying to do in many other states. They're trying to repeat the very same fallacy, the very same lie that somehow privacy, autonomy, and liberty include the killing of a baby. We will stand up and we will say, now with Supreme Court precedent on our side, that that is not the case. It never has been the case. We will not allow it to be the case moving forward in our American life. Now, one of the final point I'll make here, we have the opportunity to move forward on this by doing what these signs that we have in here tonight say, voting pro-life. And let me tell you something. Let me make a prediction for you here tonight about November 8th. It's not just going to be a red wave. It's going to be a tsunami across this country. It is going to be, and you know why? I'll tell you why I say that with confidence. It's something Newt Gingrich said recently. He said the red wave is going to be an American wave. An American wave in the sense that Americans, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or independent, there are enough Americans right now, there's a solid majority of Americans right now, who want a country that works, who want a country where they can buy things at a reasonable price, know that they have some security and safety in their communities and that crime is not spiraling out of control, that they have a country because they have a border, and that they have fundamental freedoms to educate their children the way they want and to protect the lives of their children. We do not have an America that's working right now. It is failing, it is dysfunctional, it is falling apart in numerous ways. And we see, and the American people see, an opportunity to change that. The historically low numbers of presidential approval ratings, the advantage that we have in the generic ballot, and the right-wrong track. I mean, I knew we had a drug problem in this country, but how many people have to be on drugs for even 20% of the American people to think the country's going in the right direction? It's not. But historically high numbers of people are saying that it's not, and that bodes very well for this election. But let's push harder than ever before to bring about that American wave, which is indeed a pro-life wave. Friends, 11 and a half years ago, I stood by a man who was dying in his New York City apartment. It was the man I referenced earlier, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who started the abortion industry, who was very much responsible for Roe v. Wade. Dr. Nathanson, I had come to know because he had become a pro-life advocate. He was hardly able to talk. I put my face towards his as he lay in his bed, and the first thing he said to me when I walked into his room was this. He whispered, "Father Frank, how goes the crusade?" He wasn't thinking of himself or his own suffering or even his own guilt for what he had done, although he felt that guilt heavily. But he was thinking of you and me on the front lines of the pro-life movement. How goes the crusade? He wanted to know how we were doing at undoing the evil he had unleashed just as he was trying to undo it. And I think tonight we can say to Dr. Nathanson, thanks to the prayers, the sacrifices, the witness you have given, so many with you who are not in this room right now, and so many who have been called to the next life already, thanks to all of us together being faithful not only to God, but to our American Constitution and what it really means, and the Declaration of Independence, we can say, in answer to Dr. Nathanson's question, yes, the crusade goes well. The crusade is winning. And the crusade will bring us to the final victory of the full protection of every human life, of every unborn child, from their beginning in every state of this nation. Brothers and sisters, we will see that day We are closer to that day than ever before, and so let us continue to be faithful and determined to win that victory. Thank you for all you do and for having me tonight.
Okay, at this time, and thanks again, Father Frank Pavone. That was very, very well done. At this time, I'd like the volunteers to collect the baskets at the tables for the donations. Again, thank you so much for the donations. And we have a couple of closing prayer. Mary Jean Basler, I'd like for you to come up and give the closing prayer, and then we'll sing God Bless America, and then we will close for the night.
I want to say, when Louis asked me to do a closing prayer, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and then I remembered I had this prayer, which I've had for a long time. Don't know where it came from, but it seems to be appropriate. Let us implore God's mercy on our sinful country. O merciful God, we cry to Thee for pardon and for mercy. We are an unbelieving and perverse generation. We are disobedient, disloyal, and ungrateful to Thee. We have excluded Thee from our homes, our schools, our business places. We are no longer worthy to be called Thy children. But merciful God, spare America. Forgive us. Save us from the scourge which we have deserved. Teach us Thy law. Move our wills to serve Thee. Henceforth, merciful God, please save America. Finally, unworthy though we are, but trusting in God's mercy, let us ask His blessings and peace on our president, our nation, and on the whole world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mary Jean, and I'll invite Jamie Moreland to sing God Bless America for our closing. Thank you.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountain to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountain to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. And God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie Moreland, and thank you, everyone, for your participation, your donation, and coming out. Oh, I thought I did. Make sure the volunteers have picked up the baskets for the collection, for the donations, and we thank you all for your attendance. Please drive home safely, and God bless. Thank you, everyone.
That's all. all, folks.
It's that once-in-a-lifetime special occasion that you'll want to remember forever. You can trust Uncle Larry as the videographer.
Where's Larry?
He fell asleep on the hammock.
Larry, come on! It's time!
All right, where's the camera?
You didn't bring a camera?
Or you can call us.
Lifetime Video Services, specializing in professional quality video of wedding, graduations, or any occasion. Always on time, prepared, and ready to preserve your memories. 812-254-4453.